I am Kirsten Hoffman, and I am one of the members of our Legislative Advocacy Committee. And tonight we're going to talk about this is our third in our session of training about legislative advocacy. For those of you who were with us at our last few meetings, in October, we just talked in general about how advocacy can really help support the mission of the society. And we talked about how we work both at local levels, state levels, and federal levels for advocacy. Because we do most of our work at the state level, session 2 was kind of your civics lesson. It was all about how a bill moves through the Maryland General Assembly. So now that the General Assembly session has started, tonight we're really going to focus on what is going on in the environmental sphere in this year's session and talk about some of the bills that we are working on and supporting. So first of all, a little update on the General Assembly session. As Judy mentioned, it started last week on the 14th. If you remember, the session is 90 days long, so it is short, compressed, and quick, and a lot happens in those 90 days. I believe it closes on April 11th. I think that's the last day of the session. To date, there have been just over 560 bills introduced in the House and just over 370 in the Senate. I think those numbers would have been a little higher if we hadn't had our snowy weekend, but because they haven't moved in like 3 days, and usually this is the time of year that bills are continually being introduced. We've seen those numbers get as high as 15, 16, 1700 bills. So there's a lot potentially still coming, but so far we've just been combing through the ones that have been introduced. Right now, our Advocacy Committee is following 7 of the bills, and there's 2 additional that we think are going to be presented, and so we're watching out for those. And we're also following the budget process. There are many cuts proposed this year, and I'll talk a little bit further about that later on. So this is the first year we've really had a formal advocacy committee. We have 11 members, which has been fabulous, great, enthusiastic members. And right now we've been discussing the bills, and we are writing testimony for committees. The committee hearings are starting this week, and they will go on, for several weeks of the session. And we have many committee hearings that are coming up in the next 2 weeks that we are writing 1 to 2 page testimony for, which explain our positions on the bills. Our advocacy committee members are super advocates, and many of them are also in groups like Wild Ones and the Sierra Club, as well as other groups. And this is enabling us to really pool our resources. And we are sharing information among these and other organizations so that we can all work together and strengthen our positions on the legislation we are working on. So now I'd just like to go through the 7 bills and just give you a really quick overview, just so you know what the bills are about. And then you are certainly welcome to go onto the MGA website and plug in the bill number, and you can kind of read the whole bill for yourself there. So each of these slides is structured with the bill number at the top. So this bill is HB 35, SB 266. HB is House Bill, SB is Senate Bill. So this is what they call a cross file. It is the exact same bill filed in both chambers. And then you see the 2 sponsors of the bill, Delegate Foley and Senator Brooks. If you'll notice in this presentation, Senator Brooks is the senator on all the bills that we're supporting that have a Senate bill. He is one of our superstars in the Senate for this type of legislation. And this bill, though it is called Regulation of Tree of Heaven, that's actually a narrower focus. We have worked somewhat with Delegate Foley to broaden the scope a bit of the bill. So what I'm going to quote for you is the broader scope of the bill, and we're actually still working on the scope of the bill. And some of these ideas on the bill will be introduced as amendments at the committee hearing. So what this bill proposes is to enable counties and municipalities to regulate tree of heaven and any tree on Maryland's prohibited invasive plant list. Now, an enabling bill is just what it says. It doesn't require anyone to do anything. It just says, hey, counties, this is a good idea that we want to give you the power to do. So this would be a step one, and then a county would actually have to enact some regulations. And this allows the counties to regulate sale, planting, and control. And state legislation does not deal with control of invasive. So if it's on the prohibited invasive plant list, that eventually after phase out prohibits a plant from sale, but not control. And it also encourages the counties and municipalities to create either bounty or tree replacement programs, which we've seen lots of states. You've probably heard of calorie repair replacement programs. So we're just kind of introducing this idea that this would be something that counties could look at in the future. The next bill, HB 72, which is being sponsored by Delegate Charkoudian. And this is a bill about edible forest and foraging. There's kind of two sections to the bill. First, it deals with foraging, which currently is an unregulated activity in the state. And it's asking DNR to set up a permitting system, which would both designate where foraging could occur and then have some training and fees associated with foraging, which would be occurring on department or DNR owned land. And then second, it would take the funds from those permits and any other funds that the state allocates and ask DNR to set up edible forest. Again, this is on state-owned land. The language in this bill is relatively basic, so we are actually proposing a few amendments just to kind of strengthen what we think is important about the bill. Right now, in these edible forests, the bill just requires non-invasive plants. We would like to see the language require native plants. And in fact, DNR has actually made an edible forest in Queen Anne's County that is all native plants. So we know this is possible, and we'd really like to see any edible forest going forward would only have native plant species in it. We'd also like the bill to be more specific about where these edible forests can go. We'd like them to not be converting natural areas to edible forest. We want those natural areas preserved as natural areas, and want to see edible forest on lawn areas and parks and old ag areas. So those are amendments that we are going to put in our testimony and work with Delegate Charkoudian and see if we can get the bill to reflect these. Next is HB 91. Sponsored by Delegate Healy. And this one has to do with, I'm just going to call neonic because that word is so hard to pronounce, with neonic pesticides. And it kind of has two provisions. Very popular in the agricultural sphere right now are corn, soybean, and wheat seeds that are coated with neonic pesticides. Studies have shown that those neonics will leach off and they will contaminate the soil and nearby streams. And so this bill is saying that we need to not be using these neonic treated seeds for our agricultural products unless they give the caveats that there aren't enough untreated seeds available, or if it's an undue financial hardship. But it does prohibit the use of these seeds unless the Secretary of Agriculture steps in. The other piece of it is it prohibits any neonic pesticides to be used on outdoor ornamental plants and turf. So it's got these two big sections, and neonic pesticides are already somewhat regulated in the state, and there's actually a long list of them in the bill. So it's kind of furthering on previous work to continue to remove neonic pesticides from other uses that they are currently being used with. And the second provision there can be suspended, and they called it if there's an environmental emergency, which I think means there's an infestation, there's some pathogen that's gotten loose, and if it's determined that only the neonic pesticide can actually bring the emergency under control. So again, these are ones you have to wait and see what happens, but that is HB 91. Then we move on to HB 167, sponsored by Delegate Foley. This one I'm sure many are familiar with. I think this is year 4 or 5 that Delegate Foley has tried to get a leaf blower ban passed. This one is very, very straightforward, just deals with state use and says the state can't purchase a gasoline-powered leaf blower after July 1st of this year, and making the assumption that at the most, a gas-powered leaf blower has a lifespan of about 5 years. It then says that the state and any contractor working on state-owned lands cannot use these gas-powered leaf blowers after January 1st, 2031. So it basically gives a 5-year phase-out period. The bill does recognize that some counties and municipalities have passed stricter laws, and this does not preempt those. That whichever group has a stricter law, that is the law that will hold. Then we move on to HB 217, SB 229, sponsored by Delegate Stein and Senator Brooks. This will be year 2 that we will hopefully have May designated as Maryland Native Plant Month. Very straightforward bill, but bills that are for commemorative months, the legislature usually only likes to grant maybe 1 or 2 of these each year, and we didn't quite make the cut last year. I think there's pretty stiff competition again this year. There's several bills that have already been introduced for commemorative months, but the advocates for this bill have really been out canvassing the state and getting lots and lots of people to sign on all over the state. So we are hopeful with data that's coming out, economic data, that there's more and more nurseries carrying native plants, that this would really be a boost to the industry. And, stressing those the economic benefits is going to be super important this year. And this would be a great one to have for all of our native plant nurseries. Then we have HB 255, SB 164. This bill was actually proposed by the Department of Natural Resources, so it is an agency requested bill. Back in 1989, legislation was passed that created the Pamela J. Kelly Tremendous Maryland Program. And the goal of the program was to plant native trees. And they allocated funds for that. And for the past 30 some years, the state's been planting trees and shrubs on public lands, community open spaces, etc. But what they found out over time is that the funding was restricted to just planting. So they couldn't maintain the trees. And that is what this bill does. Very simple bill that just changes the scope so that maintaining the native trees and shrub, as well as advancing forest health and resilience, are added to the purpose so that funds that DNR has to plant trees can now be used to maintain the trees. So we do have a requested amendment for this one as well. We wanted some specificity on what maintaining native trees and shrubs means. Things like using deer fencing, removing invasive plants so they don't overtake the small saplings that were planted, as well as treating for any invasions of insects and pathogens. We wanted to stress that maintenance would not include removal of healthy native trees. If someone was saying forest health required that, we want to make sure they're not taking out native trees to maintain advanced forest health. And the last one, again, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, HB 331, SB 342, which commonly is called the bottle bill. Sierra Club has been the main advocate for this, and this is, again, fifth year that this has been in the General Assembly. Each year they've made it a little better. So again, they are hopeful that this might pass this year. And basically this is very similar to bottle bills in other states. If for beverage containers would have a deposit of 10 cents if they were 24 ounces or less, and 15 cents for anything larger than 24 ounces. A container is a bottle, can, or other container, and if it can be made of glass, metal, or plastic. So it's really trying to clean up beverage containers and whatever material they're coming in. And the only exceptions for beverage are regulated drugs and infant formula. So everything else that's liquid there would count as a beverage. And I think they have an ambitious goal, which would be great. And I think it's been proven in other states to be possible to reduce the litter and pollution and have 90% of beverage containers coming back to the state instead of going into the environment. And you can see the figures there from the Maryland chapter of the Sierra Club. There's about 5.5 billion beverage containers sold in Maryland each year, an incredible amount. And our recycling, which includes both curbside and containers, only captures about 25% of that. So the other 75% is either out in the environment or in a landfill. And so it's really, really trying to capture a lot more of these containers and bring them back for recycling. So that is all of the bills that so far have been filed. The other two bills we're watching for are one about vernal pools and one, the Forward Stewardship Act. Hopefully those will be out in the next few weeks and we'll take a look at those. But one other issue that we're working on, and we will be back to you at some point, is the budget bill. The governor's bill eliminates all the funding for the Maryland Native Plant Program after this year. And the Maryland Native Plant Program, we believe, has been a tremendous success, and we want to make sure that it can continue to go forward. So we are just starting the process of figuring out the best way to keep that program funded. So please stay tuned, and we will get back to you with anything you all can do to help make sure that program keeps its funding. So last, what can you do at this point? Stay tuned, first of all. If you do not know who your House and Senate representatives are, please go to the Maryland General Assembly's website, and the website link is up there on the screen. But under members, there is a choice of Find My Representative. And all you need to do is type in your address and your zip code, and the names and contact information for your House and Senate representatives will come up. And once you know that, you will have their phone numbers and their emails. Watch your email. I think we're going to be sending out advocacy alerts when you can actually call your delegate or your senator and ask them to support a bill or occasionally oppose a bill. Most of ours are supports this year. It's really important to reach out and express your opinion. They want to hear from you, and they want to know what bills are important to you. So we will usually write you a small paragraph and give you some talking points, and of course you're welcome to customize that however you like. And that is all I have for you.
Thank you very much. And we also want to give an update that the Maryland invasive plant list that includes the plants that Kirsten referred to as being banned, we had just 6 species on that for years and years. Now with the passage of the 2024 bill, one of the stipulations was what used to be called Tier 2 plants. Plants that were invasive could still be sold but required signage. All of those have been assessed, and as of January 15th, they have been added to the prohibited list. There are 13 plants there. 3 of them are wisteria, but now with the 6 before, that brings us to 19. That is on the Maryland Department of Ag website, and I'll be putting that link, or Kirsten can put that link into the chat in case you want to check out the plants that are there. In addition, there are a list of 20 other species that are scheduled to be assessed this year, 2026. And what we've been told is that plants are going to be added to the banned list, the prohibited list, every 6 months. So if all of the 20, when they're assessed, turn out to be assessed as invasive, they will be added either 6 months into the year or at the end of the year. And we are very pleased with that. In addition, many of you helped with the regs for the law because the phase-out period, to our dismay, in the proposed regs had been moved from 2 years for in-ground woodies and 1 year for all other plants, to 3 and 5 years. So we put out a call, I believe that was in May, and many of you stepped up and contacted people and submitted comments, and those regs were pulled. And as of this past Friday, we have new regs after much negotiation, new regs that have returned to the 1 and 2 year phase out. So that was really a big deal, and thank you so much for anyone and everyone who helped with that. Now, Kirsten, you have one more comment about what people can do
Yes.
with those 20 plants that are being assessed.
Yes. So I put the link to the MDA website where you can see the 13 plants that have been added to the prohibited list and have entered their phase out period. And if you scroll down, then there's a list of 20 plants that IPAC, the Invasive Plants Advisory Committee, is going to assess in 2026. And this is where you all come in. One of the parts of the assessment is looking at the geographic spread of that invasive plant. Is it impacting sensitive habitats? Where is it occurring in our state? So we need data, and we are collecting data. One of the databases we collect from is INAT. So we need your observations. If you are out in natural areas and you see invasives, especially invasives on this list, please make an observation. Take a photo, take a context photo, photograph any unique parts, front and back of leaves, blooms, etc., and post it on INAT. The better the information of what you post, the easier it will be to identify, because all postings need to be research grade for us to use. And make sure location data is on your phone. We can't use any observations where the location data is not on. So when you post and you make these observations, that helps when we pull that information. It helps in the assessment, and it helps us to really understand what the full impact of that invasive is. And I'll make one quick comment that one plant we all take for granted that we see everywhere is English ivy, but there aren't a whole lot of observations on INAT of English ivy. It's definitely underrepresented. So if you're out and about, put in an observation on English ivy. iNaturalist is a citizen science kind of project where we make observations of native and invasive plants, and there's all kinds of science that's pulled from it, because we're locating plants, all over our state, country, and internationally even.